I'd really like to welcome you all here and welcome the Human Rights Campaign as they brought George Takei here on campus to speak to us all for the equality check. Thanks for being here tonight. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce you to the student organizer here on campus who really put this all together, Gabriele Bertaccini.
I'm not George Takei. Okay. So, anyways, it's great. You know, this is the response, and it's really. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. Yes. Okay. It's really wonderful to see more than 195 people. Probably tonight we are 200, 250. When HRC called me and asked me to organize this event, they say, you know what, we don't have space at ASU. You know, in the range 100, 110 people. I say, we have a room, 195 seats. And I say, well, it will be a hard work to pack this room. Well, yeah, it is, and I could do more. So I don't want to take more time. Now we're gonna show a brief video. It's an introduction to George Takei. Probably the majority of you guys already know who is him. However, the video is here, and then we will meet George Takei, all right? Thanks again for being here. And
George Takei, best known as Mr. Sulu on Star Trek, made international headlines when he revealed to the press that he's gay.
For me to speak out, my voice had to be authentic, had to have credibility, and that's when I spoke to the press for the first time.
George and his partner Brad Altman have shared their lives for nearly 20 years.
George Takei, best known for his role as Mr. Sulu in the Star Trek series, recently announced that he is gay.
Diversity has been a theme of George's life on and off screen. His work ranges from Hollywood pop culture icon to the nation's capital, where he has long been vocal on issues ranging from transportation to ending discrimination against Japanese Americans. When the original Star Trek TV show premiered in 1960, it was a groundbreaking program that beamed a racially and ethnically diverse cast into living rooms across the country each week. In fact, Star Trek boldly went where no one had gone before when it featured television's first interracial kiss during the height of the 1960s civil rights movement. Now George Takei is lending his considerable talent and commitment to diversity, openness, and fairness to the Human Rights Campaign's Coming Out project.
The Human Rights Campaign is actually like Star Trek in that we are both organizations that are about taking a journey that goes a little bit further each day. And if you are living openly as a gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender person, or even if you're just a straight American who supports fairness and equality for all, that's a journey that you take every day. And you do that by sharing your story and telling people about your life and just living openly.
The Human Rights Campaign is America's largest civil rights organization working to achieve gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender equality. The Human Rights Campaign advocates for equal rights in the workplace, works to ensure families are treated equally under the law, and increases public support among all Americans through innovative advocacy, education, and outreach programs. Our work takes us from Washington, D.C. to state houses across the country, to big and small businesses, to places of worship. By lobbying elected officials, mobilizing grassroots supporters, and educating Americans, the Human Rights Campaign is shaping a future for fairness.
We're so glad in the Coming Out project that George Takei is one of our spokespeople, and he's traveling the country now to share his really unique and layered story with people and hopefully encourage them to go out and talk more about their lives with their friends and family.
all right, so now we are at the section, and please welcome George Takei.
What a fantastic greeting. Thank you so very much. It is wonderful to be here. And thank you, Gabriele Bertaccini,
That's great.
Wonderful introduction, and thank you and Sam for the great work that you've done in bringing this event together and making it happen, and all the many people that worked with them and made tonight's program possible. And thank you also to many groups that's rising to the challenge, because here in Arizona there are challenges that you all face in all of the fair-minded people that believes in equality for all. You have a ballot measure coming up, and I want to thank the work that's being done, the important work that's being done by Arizona Together and the Arizona Human Rights Fund for the fantastic work that they're doing for a very daunting campaign. So thank you all very much. Throughout the month of April, I've been on the Human Rights Campaign's what we call Equality Trek. I've been going from coast to coast, visiting cities all over, from big metropolitan cities to small college towns, from the plains of the Midwest to the Rocky Mountains. As a matter of fact, earlier this week, we braved a hailstorm in Denver to speak there. And I can tell you, I am so glad to be here in Tempe. But I love Arizona for a lot more other reasons. I have a second home here, my partner and I, and we pass through Phoenix all the time. As a matter of fact, my partner, Brad Altman, was born here in Phoenix, Arizona. And I'd like to introduce him to you. We've been together for 19 years. What makes this doubly special is his mother, Vera Altman, is with us tonight. Vera, stand up. And joining her is her partner, Glenda Morris. See that being here in Phoenix is very special for me. You know, on Star Trek, when we traveled from one place to another, we had this amazing sci-fi device called the transporter that put some energy through us, and we sparkled and beamed to our destination. Then we sparkled again, and we reappeared. Well, tonight, with no help from any sci-fi device, I am sparkling and beaming. And when I'm feeling this high on all this wonderful reception, I think about my life journey and what it's been. Because there was a time in my life when it was quite different. When I was a boy, I looked out on the world from behind the barbed wire fence of U.S. internment camps. Pearl Harbor was bombed, and overnight, American citizens of Japanese ancestry were seen as the enemy, simply because we happened to look like the people who bombed Pearl Harbor. All the Japanese Americans on the West Coast were summarily rounded up with no charges, no trial, no due process. About 120,000 Japanese Americans, and they were incarcerated in 10 barbed wire internment camps in some of the most godforsaken places in the country. There were two here in Arizona, in the desert of Arizona. Can you imagine being in a black tarpaulin barrack in the blazing hot Arizona sun in the summertime? One was Gila River, and the other was coastal. There were two in California, in two of the most desolate places in California. Others were on the cold, windy high plains of Wyoming, Idaho, Utah, Colorado. And there were two in the hot, sultry swamps of southern Arkansas. I was a child too young to understand what was going on at that time, but I will never be able to forget that scary day when U.S. soldiers with bayoneted guns came to our Los Angeles home to order us out. We were taken to the horse stables of a nearby racetrack. For those of you who know Los Angeles, Santa Anita racetrack. And we were housed there for a few months while the camps were being built. And when construction was completed, we were put on a train and transported 2/3 of the way across the country to the swamps of Arkansas. I still remember those barbed wire fences. There were tall sentry towers with machine guns pointed at us. I remember the searchlight that followed us when we made the night runs to the latrine. The remarkable thing is that children are amazingly adaptable. What would be abnormal in normal times became my normality. It became normal for me to line up 3 times a day and eat in the noisy mess hall. It became normal for me to go with my father to bathe in a communal shower. It became normal for me to go to school in a black tar paper bag and begin the school day with the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I could see the barbed wire fence and the sentry tower right outside my schoolhouse window as I recited the words, "With liberty and justice for all." Those awful days, thankfully, are now long gone for Japanese Americans. But I still see an invisible, legalistic barbed wire fence that keeps me, my partner, and another group of Americans from a normal life. It's normal for two people who love each other, who take responsibility for each other, who care for each other, to be able to be married. It's normal for committed couples to be able to share in their property, insurance, and pension benefits. It's normal for men and women willing to serve their nation in the military to be able to serve without their private lives becoming an issue. What is abnormal is that gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender Americans cannot. What is outrageous is that there are people who would write this abnormality into the Constitution of the United States, and here in Arizona, into your state constitution, and I consider that these acts an egregious desecration of the Constitution. This is why the work of the Human Rights Campaign is so important. It's not only to prevent such desecration from happening to our Constitution, but to right historic injustices. It is a campaign in the classic American tradition to expand justice and equality to all Americans, including gays, lesbians, bisexual, and transgender. It is a campaign to make the ideals of this country truer and stronger. Some people may see this as a daunting effort, but I like to see this campaign in the larger historic context of America. And this nation has many amazing historic events. The very founding of this nation on those shining ideals of justice and equality was an amazing achievement in human history. Yet, the founding fathers, the great men who articulated those ideals, kept other human beings as slaves. But because those slaves hungered for freedom and justice and struggled for it, and their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren continued the struggle through the Jim Crow years, through the Civil Rights Movement, that today we have the descendants of slaves, African Americans, in the halls of Congress as legislators, and 2 have become secretaries of state. And because African Americans have equality, America is better and stronger and truer to its ideals. When this nation was founded, there was no role for women in the institutions of American society. Yet, because determined women and fair-minded men challenged and debated and marched for equal rights for women, that today we have women corporate CEOs, women astronauts, and women as real potential presidents of the United States. And because women have equal rights today, America is better and stronger and truer to its ideals. When I was a boy, American citizens were incarcerated with no due process simply because of our ancestry. But because thousands of young Japanese American men and women volunteered from behind those barbed wire fences, leading their families in imprisonment to fight for the ideals of this country on those bloody battlefields of Europe and the Pacific Theater, that today I can stand before you as a proud gay American and advocate for equal rights. And because Japanese Americans have equality, America is better, it's stronger, and it's truer to its ideals. Our democracy is a continuing and dynamic work in progress. The strength of our democracy is in the good, decent, fair-minded Americans actively engaging in the struggle of their generation. African Americans struggled through many, many generations and made America better. Those who struggled for women's rights struggled for many, many generations and made America a better nation. Japanese Americans struggled for just one generation. And now there's equality, and we are fully contributing to making this nation better and stronger and truer. We have a great challenge before us. This is the great challenge of our generation. Equality for gays, lesbians, bisexual, and transgender. And I know we can rise to this challenge because of the great history of America. We have done amazing things. And we will do amazing things in our generation, facing the challenge of this generation. And as a proud member of the Human Rights Campaign, I join with all good, fair-minded, and decent Americans, and together we will boldly go where America has never gone. Now for the fun part, the dialogue, the sharing of your thoughts, your comments, your lives, and whatever questions that you might have. Yes, way in the back.
What enabled you or prompted you to come out?
Well, Brad and I have been out for many, many years with family and friends. I mean, when you have a mother like Vera, it's easy to come out. And we've been active in various Los Angeles civic and social and nonprofit causes. And our names have literally been carved in granite together on donor walls. So we've been out. The only thing I hadn't done was speak to the press, because that's a whole different ballgame. But there was an historic event that happened in California last year that prompted me to break that policy that we had. The California State Legislature did an amazing thing. They passed, the people's body passed the same-sex marriage bill. It was a landmark event. Nothing like that had happened all across the United States. Even in Massachusetts, where they have this legalized same-sex marriage. It was through the judicial process, not the legislative process. And all that was required for that bill to become the law of the state was the signature of, well, actually the autograph of another actor who happens to be the governor of the state of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger. And when Arnold ran for governor, he made all these politic, moderate statements. He said, you know, he's from Hollywood. He's worked with gays and lesbians. He's comfortable with gays and lesbians. Some of his best friends are, you know, all of these things. And many people voted for him on that basis. They felt that they trusted him. They were wrong. He betrayed them by vetoing that bill and playing to the narrowest, most reactionary segment of his conservative base. And I felt that I needed to speak out, and for me to do that, my voice needed to be authentic. And that's when I talked to the press, and it opened the Pandora's box.
I really admire what you're doing in the right campaign, but my main question is, when are you going to be back on the Howard Stern?
Well, that too is a part of what came out of Pandora's box.
I heard that show was great. The whole week.
Yeah, the whole first week.
Yes.
You know, let me give you some background on my relationship with Howard Stern. I knew nothing about the man and nothing about his show. But I was doing a play in New York. And when you're doing a play, you have the responsibility of promoting the play. And the publicist gave me, this was in 1990, gave me an address where I was to do a radio talk show. And so that particular morning, I went to that Madison Avenue address, and the receptionist asked me to sit there in the waiting room, and they'll call us. And so I was flipping through a magazine, and they had this radio show on. It was the crudest discussion going on. And I said to the guy sitting next to me, why don't they get some nice music? And he told me, that's the show we're waiting to go on. That was my first indication. And then they took me, they were ready, they took me into the studio, and I sat down, and here's this wild-haired guy. And I said good morning, and he said good morning. We exchanged some salutations, and there are no children here, are there? So I shared that dialogue. I still remember. He said, oh, I didn't know you had such a deep voice. Anyone with a voice that deep has got to have a big dog. Are we on the air? That was my introduction to him. so we had a nice conversation. It wasn't a comfortable conversation. And I got the title of our play out many, many times in that conversation. And I came, after the show was over, I told the publicist, you know, that's it. I'm not going to do that man's show again. You know. Well, a few years after that, my autobiography was published. And again, you had emotional responsibility. I was in New York at the publisher's office, and the publicist gave me this list of things that she wanted me to do while I was in New York. And there were some that I couldn't do because there were conflicts, so I crossed them out. And when I came across the Howard Stern show, I crossed that out too. She saw that, and she said, "Oh, George, you've got to do it. If you have a conflict, you know, cancel that and do the Howard Stern show." And I said, "You know, I've done that show before. I know what that's like, and I don't think his readership can even read." He said he can sell tens of thousands of books. It's very important that you do it. So please, please, please do it. And this very professional-looking tailored woman got on her knees. I said, "Get up, all right, I'll do it. But you owe me." I did that show again. And I was foolish enough to reveal that together with the book, there's an audio version. I read my own book. Well, that was a real mistake. Because he got a copy of that. And he had his technicians fiddle with it. And one morning I got a phone call. There was a friend saying, "George, you were on the Howard Stern show saying the filthiest thing." No, I never, you know, I haven't done a show in months now. No, I think you're mistaken. He said, "No, it was your voice, and you were saying those things." And then I realized what had happened. He took my audio cassette and had me say some of the most unbelievable things, you know. And then I've had other experiences with him. One morning, my phone rang, and I picked it up, and he said, "Hi, George." He said, "Ricardo." I worked with him. He did a guest shot on one of our TV episodes, and the second movie, The Wrath of God. So I engaged in conversation with him, and we kept going back and forth, and I told him about a Star Trek cruise and this and that. And then as I listened, his accent wasn't quite Ricardo. And so I said, "I don't think you're Ricardo." And he laughed, and I knew I was bamboozled, so I hung up. Well, 2 mornings later, my Howard Stern fan friend called again and said, "George, you were hilarious on the show." "You were talking to Ricardo Montalbano." Bamboozled again. And so on the second day of this year, January the 2nd, the phone rang, I picked it up, and the guy on the other end said, "This is Gary Delabate. I'm the producer of the Howard Stern show." And I burst out laughing. I thought it was another poster, you know. And he said, "No, don't hang up. I'm for real. I am the producer of the Howard Stern show. And you're not being recorded." And I said, "Well, all right, I'll listen to you. What do you have to say?" And he said, "Would you consider being the announcer for Howard Stern on the Sirius network? He's moving to satellite radio." And I said, "Why are you asking me? I have an agent. You know, call him and negotiate." He said, no, I wanted to get an indication from you whether you would be willing to consider it." I said, Oh, consider it. But talk to my agent. And so I gave him my agent's name and number, and I hung up thinking that, that was another hoax. Well, my agent called, and he said he had worked out a deal. And so I turned out to be the very first voice on Howard Stern's satellite broadcast, and spent a week with him. I figured, since I have no choice in the matter, I've been on the Howard Stern show involuntarily, with no control over what I'm saying. I might as well at least go on the show and have some control over what I say. Well, how wrong I was. Because he knew why, I had talked to the press for the first time, and the second day, he said, we have Arnold Schwarzenegger calling in today. He has celebrities calling in. And he said, George, would you like to talk to him? And I said, I most certainly would. I have a bone to pick with our governor. And so when he called in, he switched over to me. And I began talking to him. And, in typical Arnold fashion, when he doesn't want to address an issue, he'll crack jokes and do a offshoot dance and try to change the subject. And I said to him, Mr. Governor, you are elected to a serious office. And the decisions you make serious impacts on people in your state. So I expect you to address this issues and discuss it seriously. And so we had a discussion. And we had a very lively back and forth. And finally, he said, all right, George, you make sense. The next time the legislature passes a same-sex marriage bill, I'll sign it. I was astounded. And I turned around to Howard and I said, Howard, you are not only the king of all media. You have powerful political muscles. You have just made American history here on your show with the governor of California. And then he told me, this guy was an Arnold impersonator. But that discussion prompted a lot of emails from the Howard Stern listeners. And many of those emails identify themselves as, I'm a straight, male, married, suburban Republican from Oklahoma or Nebraska or North Carolina, and they said, based on that discussion I had with that fake Arnold, if our legislature should pass that kind of bill, I will support it. That was So I'm grateful to Arnold because he gave me that kind of opportunity to reach, and as it turned out, Arnold's listeners do read. And they write books, and they're thoughtful, and they write emails like that. I must say the response has been fantastic. It's been overwhelmingly positive and some really moving. And so, Arnold has been a good assist in my sharing my life with a larger and different public. And I think that's what we have to do. We can't just talk to ourselves. We have to reach out and share our lives and the normality of our lives with the larger community. Because we've been stereotyped. One-dimensional cartoons. And when a group of people are stereotyped, it's easier to discriminate because they see that stereotype. And I know about stereotypes as a Japanese American because over half a century ago, Japanese Americans were stereotyped as treacherous, evil, villains. And so it was easier to round us up and incarcerate us. America really didn't know Japanese Americans as human beings. And that's what we need to do with the stereotype that the GLBT community has been saddled with. By sharing our lives, by talking about our lives, we get understanding. And out of that understanding, we flesh out who we are. You know, we become fully rounded. And we are. Everybody. We're students, we're corporate CEOs, we're teachers, we're professional athletes, we're actors, we're everything. And we live very normal lives, like the larger community, with one difference, or two or three differences. But, you know, that exists throughout. It's the diversity of America that makes this country as strong and as vibrant and as successful as it is, bringing that diversity together. And that's what this Human Rights Campaign is all about. Yes, sir.
How does your acting colleagues respond to your work with the HRC, specifically from the show and movies Star Trek? How have they responded? And also, my second question is, were you all reunited before
Let me take the last question first. Jimmy was beloved by all of us. He was a dear, sweet guy. I considered him my best drinking buddy. Oh, he taught me a lot. And I taught him a few things too. When he moved to Redmond, Washington, then, you know, we saw each other only at Startrek conventions. He was a very dear, sweet person. And when we learned that he got Alzheimer's, we called, and I, you know, maintained some telephone communication with him. But, you know, it's not a situation where you get better. And, you know, when I talked to his wife, it wasn't a happy situation. So I stopped calling. But there was one final convention that was planned around Jimmy in Hollywood. And we saw him there at that convention. He couldn't speak. He was in a wheelchair by that time. But when I held his hand, it was very weak. And I said, Jimmy, it's good to see you. He looked up, and I could see, you know, recognition in his eyes. And he whispered, it's good to see you too. You know, that was the last conversation I had with him. And after that, we learned that he had passed. And a month after his passing, we had a memorial service for Jimmy in Hollywood. And it was a happy occasion. We wanted to celebrate, you know, because he was a joyful, robust kind of guy. You know, he's really an Irishman, a Canadian, a Canadian Irishman. But he used to tell me that he's imbibed enough of the liquid of Scotland to qualify. And so we shared stories like that at the memorial service, and that's the way we wanted to remember Jimmy. And we were told by his family that his remains will be shot out into space, just like Gene Roddenberry. So it hasn't happened yet, but when I look up at that sky after he's been shot up there, it's good to know that he's twinkling down at us from up there. And you know, about my Star Trek colleagues, you know, when I was first cast, you know, well, it was a whole different time in Hollywood, and so, you know, I didn't speak about my being gay. But they're sophisticated, worldly people. You know, they get the vibrations that I send out. And the first time that I got the idea that Walter knew was when we had a very good-looking extra wearing the tight Starfleet uniform. And Walter and I were engaged in conversation, and I didn't see this extra, but Walter said, and I knew that Walter knew it. Walter knew it. We all turned out to be And so, you know, we had this common unspoken understanding. And Brad and I have had Walter and his wife over for dinner, and we've been over at their place. Same thing with Michelle and Jimmy when he was still living in LA. And so, you know, without coming out to them, I've been out with them. Without using the words, you know, we shared a good friendship. We, Brad and I, shared a good friendship with my colleagues. Since I've been talking to the press, I've talked with Walter and Michelle, but they really haven't commented on it. They think, you know, okay, George is doing his thing. It's part of what George, because I've been campaigning for, you know, political candidates and other issues. And so, you know, George is doing his thing. And so they've not really made any specific comment about the human rights campaign that I'm doing, but they know that it's in character. Yes?
Going back to the internment, that must have been, for the community, must have been, the Japanese community must have been.
Japanese American. We were American citizens in U.S. internment camps. You know, so often in the press I see a reference to it as Japanese internment camps. They were not. We were captured by our own government and incarcerated in our own country. We weren't captured by Japan. We were captured by the United States.
I stand corrected. I don't know, but there must have been a deep sense of betrayal, and I wonder how that's reverberated, and continues, if it does, reverberate within the Japanese American community. Is it discussed? Is it simply put aside? How does it continue to be dealt with as it transfers, as the memories and the stories transfer from generation to generation?
It's a very complex and layered history. People reacted to it in many, many different ways. There were people that felt truly, deeply betrayed. And their attitude was, well, if you're going to treat us like the enemy, by God, we'll show you what kind of enemy you have to contend with. And they became radical. They were patriotic Americans made radical by the treatment that we got from the government. In fact, one of the most articulate and outspoken leaders of the radical group was a veteran of the First World War. He had fought for this country, and he felt truly betrayed. But there was another group that are equally to me. I mean, I'm so grateful I was as young as I was, because I don't know how I would have reacted to it at that time if I were in my late teens or 20s. But there's another group of young Japanese American women, as I said, who volunteered from incarceration to fight for this country. They felt that, you know, in fact, well, I could tell you a lot of other stories, but they felt that when they were growing up, like me, they were pledging allegiance to the flag, and that they really seriously meant it. And this government didn't believe that. And by God, they were going out to show them, you know, what kind of American they are. And they fought with the most extraordinary valor, particularly in Europe. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team was an all Japanese American unit, and they became the most decorated unit of its size to emerge from the Second World War. To describe some of the battles that they fought. In April of 1944, the Allied advance was stalemated, halted at the Gothic Line. Now, what the Gothic Line was a mountain fortress embedded with some of the toughest Nazi SS troops. And 3 battalions had been pounding away at it and they were still. And the 442nd was called in to create a diversionary attack. Well, rather than the 442nd came up with an incredible plan of attack. The backside of that mountain was a sheer cliff, a drop of about 400 feet. They decided they were going to scale that sheer cliff. And so with nightfall, in full combat gear, they started to scale that sheer cliff. In the dark, some of the men lost their footing or their handle, and they fell to their death in the ravines below. They all fell silently. Not a single man cried out so as not to give away their position. At dawn, at first break of light, they attacked. They took the hill and broke the Gothic line in 34 minutes. A 6-month stalemate was broken in 34 minutes. Amazing story. And there are many, many amazing stories like that. And when the 442nd returned to the United States, they were greeted on the White House lawn by President Harry Truman, who said to them, "You fought not only the enemy, but prejudice, and you won." And I owe so much to these incredible, amazing, almost, crazy men whose valor and the heroism that they demonstrated made it possible for me to be able to move to this American society as I do. I owe them so much. And in the year 2000, I received a very special invitation from the White House to witness the granting of 23 Medals of Honor, the highest military recognition that the nation can grant. 19 of them were for Japanese American veterans of the Second World War in the year 2000. When the war ended, these 19 men were given the Distinguished Service Cross, which is the second highest honor. Second highest. But in 1996, Congress mandated a review of their records, and they found that indeed their heroism was eminently deserving of the highest recognition, and it was only wartime prejudice that had demoted them to the second highest award. And so I sat there in the White House and heard their names called. They were all very elderly by this time, in their 70s and 80s. In fact, one was in a wheelchair, and there were a few that leaned on canes. But I could feel the pride that came from them. And one of them, incidentally, was the senior senator from the state of Hawaii, Senator Daniel Inouye, who has an empty right sleeve because he lost his right arm on a battlefield in Italy. It was a deeply moving experience for me. These men made it possible for me to get an invitation from the White House, for me to be able to do the things that I do, to be active in the political arena, to be public. They paved the way at such huge, incredible cost. I owe them so much. And this is another story of America, of American patriotism that really isn't talked about in our history books. And so I've taken it upon myself to share it with the American public wherever I get that opportunity. They are true American heroes.
Mr. Takei, I got your autobiography, the very famous one.
The audio one.
Yes. And it came out in 1994. If everybody doesn't know, it's called To the Stars, and it's really hard to find now. I'm wondering, are you planning an updated version now that you've come out, so that way everybody else can know? Are you planning an updated version of your autobiography?
Thank you for the plug. And thank you for that question, because yes, I am planning a second autobiography. I've lived, that, as you say, it came out in 1994. I stopped the story in 1991. And so I've lived a lot of material since then. But also, I left some very obvious gaps in To the Stars. I will fill in the gaps, put it in the larger context, and continue the story from 1991 to present times. And that was called To the Stars. I've got the title for the next one already. It's called Down to Earth. Thank you. Yes, in the, what is it, blue?
Did you get Howard Stern to narrate?
I don't think I'll tell them about it. Yes.
Obviously, you've been very political aspect of talking to Japanese Americans. I myself am Arab American, and after 9/11, it's been going through the same things. You have the look differently, the name differently, and you just kind of get this optimism. You say, yes, I'm Palestinian, or yes, I'm Arab, or yes, I'm Muslim. Have you decided to go out there yet and fight for some of the Arabs out there?
Well,
So much experience with each other.
our history books have been much too mute about the Japanese American experience. It's a dark chapter, and certainly I think Americans are reluctant to hear about them, but I think we have enough glorious chapters so that we can look at the dark chapters. And I think it's important to look at the chapters where America stumbled, because we prevent that sort of thing from happening again. Unfortunately, it hasn't been really focused on in our educational system, and here it is happening again. And we as Japanese Americans feel a special responsibility to respond to that. At that time, I was serving as the chairman of the board of the Japanese American National Museum. The museum we have in Los Angeles, but it's a national museum, and we send our exhibits all over. And we immediately called a candlelight vigil on our plaza, and we marched through downtown Los Angeles, and we had speakers from the Arab American community as well as the Japanese American community to speak. This was about a week after September 11th. And then we held a symposium in the Grand Hall of the Japanese American National Museum. And we had a representative from the LA Sheriff's Department, LA, not the police department, but the executive director of the Human Relations Commission, a leader of the Arab American community, somebody from the FBI, and a Japanese American, older Japanese American, who was incarcerated. And this was broadcast on our local NPR station. So it wasn't just the people gathered at the museum, but broadcast throughout Southern California. And then the first Board of Trustees meeting that we had, we scheduled it for Detroit, because that is the largest concentration of the Arab American community in the United States. And after our board meeting, we had a symposium with the local leaders, and we found out that there is an effort to build a Arab American museum in Detroit, or Dearborn, I guess, what it is. And so our staff consulted with the people that are building that museum. So we've had a very immediate as well as strongly intertwined relationship with the Arab American community of the Detroit area. We feel that as Americans who have experienced that failure of our American system, and because it is failing again, we have a particular responsibility to bring our voices in concert with that of Arab Americans and all, as we're saying with the GLBT effort, all good, decent, fair-minded Americans. We've got to learn from history. And I'm sorry that it's being inflicted on the Arab American community. And we must never, ever let this happen for a third time. Oh, I'm told you're the last, too. First and last.
Two-part question. It was such a great speaking voice. Do you do any other books, movies, anything on tape? And the second question I need to ask is, do you have a favorite episode or a favorite
Bless your heart. I was wondering when that question.
I'll be the one to say it.
I do a lot of voice work. I do narrations. I do Saturday morning animated cartoons.
Batman and Beyond.
What?
Batman and Beyond.
Batman and Beyond. You're a connoisseur of Saturday morning. And next month, I narrate an 8-part NPR documentary called Crossing East, an epic story of the Asian Americans. You know, we say American pioneers went west. Go west, young man. Well, there's another group of Americans that came east across the Pacific, and this is their 8-part story. So do look up in your radio guide this documentary series called Crossing East. And I do a lot of voice work. So thank you very much. And then I've recorded a lot of books on tapes as well. And to your second question, what my favorite episode is, that's the episode titled Naked Tie. It's been a fantastic evening. You're doing great work, and I'm here to applaud you and encourage you on to do what you're doing so well and so energetically, because you have some important challenges, and particularly in November. But the important thing is to prepare for November now. And Arizona Together and Arizona Human Rights Fund is doing a fantastic job. So I urge you all to work.
As a guy who's been to more than 100 Star Trek conventions, very disturbing scene. Yeah, this is normal. This is the local line.
More of an Arizona thing.
Yeah, so the locals are not upset about this line. Yeah, I'm Brad. Oh, now how can I respond to that one?